Said to Scotty Bowman, what is the truth of the matter with respect to the rumors that Toronto tried to hire you?
I think when it came down to it, I had a very strong meeting with Larry Tannenbaum one day in mid-August, and I felt, things might, I was getting very interested. And then he said, of course, he wanted me to meet Richard Petty, which I did, and I met Richard for an hour a week later. And then he said he would call me, which he did, and he said nothing too new to report. But his final call a few days later, he said that the season is about 3 weeks away. There's a lot of training camp games coming up, and he said we've decided to go with what we have. So I had pretty well put my cards on the table with Toronto that for me to come in, it would have to be like a Brian Colangelo type of deal. They had experience with Brian and what he had done for the Raptors, and I said I think the only way it's going to work for me would be a Brian Colangelo situation. I met most of the board members. I gave my resume of what I thought I could do. I told them what I felt the blueprint would be, because taking what I had been from Detroit and my other cities. And I don't know what happened between the time I left Larry Tannenbaum's office and the time I talked with Richard Petty in St. Catharines. I don't really know what transpired, because I'm not privy to any of the inner goings of the board.
It was clear from the interview that Scotty wanted the job as president of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He said, and this was interesting because everybody thought that he was going to come in and clean house, he said it would be my $3 million, like Colangelo, less John Ferguson's salary. So he clearly intended on keeping John Ferguson Jr.
Or the GM, which means he's not going to be GM. It could have been a little looked at it that way as well.
Okay, that's good pickup. PJ, what do you think, Rick? What's going on?
Well, I mean, word about Ferguson starting to spread around the NHL right now. 2 weeks ago, as we reported on CBC, Elliot Friedman talked about how Ferguson, between periods, went down to the Leafs dressing room, which was an unusual move. And I'd heard that when he was down there, he called out Kyle Wellwood and Ponikarovsky and Jason Blake.
Not uncommon. I've had general managers come down, not necessarily between periods, but after games.
But Ferguson never went down prior to that.
Shouting at you?
But anyway, let Rick finish.
And in another move, on the flight back from Phoenix after another poor outing in Phoenix, apparently Ferguson said, we'll watch a movie on the team plane, but it's not going to be a comedy. I don't know what that shows, other than the fact that maybe he's thinking, micromanaging a little bit too much.
Fergie's a dead man walking. Everybody knows that. The question is, what are they going to do? The Leafs have money, and that's their big asset. You can only spend $50 million or so on your players. There's no limit to what you can spend elsewhere. It's about time that they found a way to get the guy. And it doesn't have to be a guy who's in hockey. You don't have to say, well, we got to wait till he's available, whatever. Look out there, see who are the best people available everywhere, and then decide. Go out a bit. Go a guy like Mike Gillis, an agent who had been offered a job.
How could you not take Scotty Bowman? If he wanted the job...
It doesn't matter, though.
Well, that's how this place works.
He is a little older, but the people that he'd bring. And the problem with Toronto Maple Leafs, a lot like Montreal Canadiens, a lot of people don't want to play for this franchise while they're young, while they're in the middle of their career. They want to come at the tail end of their career, because there's a lot of people like Al that are tough on some of the players. It's a tough market to play in.
It doesn't matter who you bring in right now. This is a 3 or 4 year project to turn this team around. Who do the Toronto Maple Leafs have in the minors?
Maybe a 3 or 4 year project in 3 years. Of course it matters.
Yeah, well, go on, though.
Well, tell me who in the minors is going to be able to come up and help this team in the next year or two.
Well, look at Philadelphia Flyers. They went out and got players. You don't necessarily have to bring them up to the minors. You do need some. You do need a couple, which they could have the goalie of the future maybe playing tonight, Justin Pogge.
PJ, just on the point of Bowman being old, too, that's sort of a ridiculous assertion. Frank Bonello, Central Scouting's head, always said of 10 scouts, 3 ought to be 65 or older, because you need guys who've seen it all. If anything, the criticism on JFJ and Paul is that they're young.
You can't say anything ever wrong against Scotty Bowman. I'm just saying, the people that he'd bring, that's why putting him in charge for 5-6 years, he's going to be up there in age by the time it ends.
But I think we're missing the point. Like, who is going to do it? Like, as Scotty said, he talks to one guy, he talks to another guy. I can tell you this. The last time that they picked a general manager, candidate goes in, he goes upstairs, listens to Petty for a while, tell him how good a job he's done economically, goes separately now to go and see Ken Dryden. Ken Dryden talks about the wonderful of hockey and the mistake and everything. Now he's sent downstairs to talk to Pat Quinn. Pat Quinn says, I don't know what you're doing here. And that was the interviewing process. No wonder they never get the right guy.
But don't you guys think that this team would be better off if, as they're heading this season, finished right near the end of the standings, happened again next year, maybe take a run at an unrestricted free agent 2 years from now, like Rick Nash, and do the Chicago model, where you end up with players like Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane.
Everyone's they got to finish dead last, and they got to. I mean, really, before tonight, Toronto, calm down a second. If they would have won tonight, and the other teams would have lost, they would have only been 3 points out of a playoff spot, 4 because of the tiebreakers, with 40 games to play. But in Toronto, they got to blow everything up. Everyone's talking about the general manager. I think it's a lot more than general manager. He signed a lot of players that he had to. He had to address scoring.
We're agreed. There's a conflict between Tannenbaum and Petty that's creating a paralysis. So now, Rick, just one last thing on this, and then we got to move on. Have you heard anything about the board meeting coming up, and has there been any move afoot to revisit the Scotty Bowman? Have you heard that, Al, either?
No, I think there might be an ownership shuffle coming around. That's what people are talking about, that the Thompson Group would increase their holding.
That makes sense.
But then there is that problem of Tannenbaum's first refusal, but that could be changed if they change the Constitution to make sure that Petty has no vote.
It's actually not. Tannenbaum doesn't have the first right of refusal, as I understand it. If one of the owners wants out, if Teachers wants out, every other of the 3 minority owners, CTV, Globe Media, Tannenbaum, and TD Bank, can all buy those shares prorated. So it's not like Larry Tannenbaum has some sort of a...
But Thompson makes sense, but then Thompson's never been a big supporter of Tannenbaum being in the driver's seat. So,
Definitely not.
That is an interesting complication. What about